Connecting the interface to the implementation. One common pattern inside of MMUULLEE is to pass messages to other flows. Flows can be broken up into multiple flows. This will make the graphical view more intuitive and the XML code easier to read. It also promotes a level of reuse because you can call a single flow from multiple other flows. All flows are identified by name and can be called via components in other flows. Please note that in the developer courses, you're going to learn much more about flows and subflows in a later module. And this is what we'll look at next, implementing a RESTful web service. We'll pass a message from one flow to another, create new logic for the nested resource call the backend flows, and once again test the web service in the API Kit console and via Postman. Let's get started. Back inside of Studio, we'll start off by ensuring the project is not running. We now want to take one of the XML files from the previous application into our new one. So in this case, I'm going to start off by closing out all existing tabs I have, just to make sure I don't get confused. And inside of APDev American Web Service, let's make sure we have the API XML open, which is the XML we were just looking at. Now what we'd like to do here is expand APDev American, our original application, look inside of the source main app, and we want to take the XML file from source main app and bring that into APDev American Web Service. So what we can do here is copy it by hitting Command-C or Control-C, and go to source main app in our new application and paste it in with the respective Command-V or Control-V. Now we've got the APDev American XML inside. Another thing that we're going to need to do is to bring down the driver that enabled our application to connect to the database. So for example, if we double click on APDev American and go to Global Elements, we can double click on the MySQL configuration. And we can see inside of here that it does still need the MySQL driver. Now, if you're comfortable with browsing out to that, you could go and browse out to that as well. But one small trick that we could use here, since we had the MySQL driver in an existing project, is in the existing project, under Reference Libraries, we're going to see that existing jar that we imported. So a quick trick you could do is simply copy it to your clipboard through the same mechanism, select your new project, and paste it in. And this will automatically put it in the class path under Reference Libraries. So now you can see that APDev American XML is no longer complaining about not having the database. And if you want to be sure that it's working okay, once again, you can make sure you're inside of apdev-american.xml in your APDev American Web Service application, open up the MySQL config, and click Test Connection again. If the connection does go through successfully, then you know you have your driver in place and you're able to talk to the database once again. So let's hit OK here. OK again to this box. And just to make sure that we don't get confused, I'm going to scroll up to the APDev American project, right-click on that project, and close it. This will just make sure that none of its files are open as we're working. And I'll make sure that my APDev American WS application is expanded. Now, another thing that I'd like to do inside a source main app is make sure that these XMLs have a bit of a better name. And your XML files might even vary a bit from my name. So first one is my API XML. This is going to be your XML file with the API Kit router and the flows with resources and methods in them. Let's rename this flow and let's call it the interface.xml. So we'll right-click on it, go to Refactor, Rename. If it asks us to save the modified resources, we can hit OK. And again, we'll call this interface.xml. Now similarly, in our APDev-American XML, this is more of our implementation flow, since it's going out and requesting the MySQL database and so on. So let's right-click on this. We'll go to Refactor and Rename. And we'll call this one implementation.xml. And hit OK. All right. So another conflict that we are going to run into with this new setup is we've now got two HTTP listeners configured. We have an HTTP listener from our old project from the XML we copied over, and our new project, which had the existing API XML that's now called interface XML. Now we're going to have two HTTP listeners that are conflicting with one another. If we open up our interface XML and our implementation XML, let's go to the global elements in both of them. So in the implementation XML, I'll click on global elements, and in the interface XML, I'll go to global elements. Now you can see in both cases, the interface has an HTTP listener and the implementation has an HTTP listener. Well, let's get rid of the HTTP listener in the implementation and keep the existing API-based one in the interface. If we were to start the app right now with these both live, they would try to bind to the same port and throw bind errors. So again, in the implementation XML, I'm going to select the HTTP listener and delete it. Now that we're down to one HTTP listener, our application should be pretty well off, but we do need to wire it up and make sure that requests can flow through. If we go to the graphical interface inside of the implementation, we no longer need all these HTTP listeners at the beginning of the flows. So let's go ahead and start by removing the listener or source from each one of these flows. Now what we want to do is take our API-Kit router-based flows and have them send the messages into these more operation-based flows, like getFlights flow, getFlightsById flow. If we head back to the interface XML and back to the graphical view, we'll scroll down inside to reveal our getFlights flow. So inside of getFlights, let's start by deleting the set payload since that's no longer relevant. And let's bring in a flow reference. Now, as described in the slides, the flow reference that we're bringing in here is going to allow us to call another flow from this flow. If we double click on the flow reference and drop down the flow name box, it's going to give us a list of all the flows in the application. So in this case, for the getFlights API config flow, we want to flow ref into the getFlights flow. We'll select that. You'll see the doc name change. And when you click into the canvas, you'll see the icon change reflecting what flow you're calling. Let's repeat this for the next two. We'll delete set payload from flights ID, put the flow ref into process, and then go down to getFlightsById flow. Click outside, see it update, and we'll try the same thing for post flights. We'll delete the existing components inside of it, drop a flow ref in. This one will, of course, call post-flight flow. Click inside of the canvas, and there we go. Now we are flow refing into the items in our implementation. Let's save up the entire project. Now, a cool trick, especially when your projects get larger and larger, is that you might wish, when looking through flows, to be able to jump to wherever the flow ref is going to call. So if we were developing a larger application, I might want to go directly to the getFlights flow right from the flow ref. You can do this in two ways. You can now right-click in the flow ref and go to the reference flow, or hit F3 on your keyboard. Doing this will take you right to the flow and highlight that flow so you can see exactly what it would have called. Now, if we run the application, all inbound requests to our interface XML should call these backend flows, and we should have the same functionality as when we had manually set up the API. Let's try it out. So we'll right-click on our canvas, run the project, and see if it starts up. All right, now that it's started up okay, let's go to get inside of our flow. And I'll double click on the API-Kit console to make it a bit larger. We'll expand our code and do SFO as an example and hit get. And there we go. Now we have our database data coming back inside of our application. Right now, still not smart enough to respect the code, but we'll get there a bit later. If we close out this get, and do a get for flights ID, we can put in an ID such as ID2, hit get, and there we go. Now we have ID2. Now there is a subtle difference inside of API-Kit with how these numbers or URI parameters would be respected. So let's take a different look at how we could set this up. If you double click on the API-Kit consoles tab, go to the database query for getFlightsById flow in the implementation XML. Scroll down to your query. And previously, we had this really long expression where we'd say message inbound properties HTTP URI params ID. Now, if you look to the right in the metadata explorer, notice there's a new flow variable available to us called ID. The flow variable can also be accessed through a mule expression. So we can replace this entire expression with flowvars.id. Now, the reason this is available to us in a flowvar is because the API kit router inside of the interface XML is smart enough to realize that when you have URI parameters, you just want to put them in a variable for easy access. That way we don't have to introspect the whole message and find that particular field. Now, if all goes well, we should be able to save this up, and our flows should work exactly the same. So we'll click in the canvas and save the project. The console in a moment should restart the application after seeing the change. And this time, let's go into Postman and make sure it works from there as well. Inside of Postman, we'll make a request for flights 4, hit send, and there's our 4th flight. Using the flowvar, we're able to achieve the exact same results with a little bit of a more concise syntax. So now we've seen APIs being generated from API Kit and routed into an implementation flow via a flow reference.